Welcome to the deep dive. You guys sent in some really interesting stuff about how social media is like changing the whole dating game. We've got YouTube commentary, insights from therapists, and even some spicy social media posts. So quite the mix to unpack.
It is like this cloud of different worlds, right? You've got therapists warning about all these new ways people can manipulate each other, and then you have commentators saying all the traditional relationship rules are, outdated. It's fascinating.
Totally. And then somewhere in the middle of all that, you've got people just trying to figure out this whole world of dating apps and, online personas and everything. So let's dive into how social media is like changing the game of love and what it all means for us, I guess. One of the sources you sent is this YouTube video where a commentator called Taylor the Fiend is reacting to a female marriage therapist who's on a channel called Mankind.
Oh, wow, Taylor the Fiend.
Yeah, and her advice is pretty bold. She says, never believe a woman's story.
Ooh, that's going to get some attention.
Right.
Yeah.
So she's talking about this from the perspective of marriage counseling.
Okay.
And she argues that women are like really good at presenting their side of the story, which, sometimes involves manipulating the narrative to get sympathy or to avoid taking responsibility. And what I thought was really interesting is that she admits that she's fallen for these types of narratives herself, like before becoming a therapist.
Oh, wow. That adds another whole layer to it, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah, it makes you think she's not just speaking from theoretical knowledge, but from personal experience, which makes her argument, well, more interesting at least.
Yeah, definitely. So what does Taylor the Fiend think about all this?
Well, he seems to agree with the therapist. He actually takes it even further and says this type of behavior, from women has created a boy who cried wolf situation where real cases of abuse are actually harder to, figure out because of because of the made-up stories.
Okay, so that's a pretty serious implication. He's basically saying that this manipulation can actually hurt like real victims of abuse because it makes people less likely to believe women when they tell their stories.
Exactly. And that leads us to that whole very heated debate around the believe all women movement.
Right, and the commentator does not hold back at all. He argues that blindly accepting every accusation without any evidence is really dangerous. He says it throws the whole idea of innocent until proven guilty out the window.
So he's saying that, by removing due process, you risk creating a situation where accusations alone can just ruin people's lives, whether they're actually true or not.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point. But of course, there's the other side of that argument too, right? We can't just ignore the historical context. For a long time, women just haven't been believed when they've come forward with stories of abuse. So it's like this, delicate balance we have to find between supporting survivors and making sure things are fair.
Yeah, it's a really tough issue for sure. And to be fair to the commentator, he does acknowledge that women have faced that kind of disbelief in the past.
Right.
But he then suggests that, the loudest people, pushing the believe all women narrative are often the ones who benefit from being treated differently, and who want to avoid any consequences for their own actions.
Okay, that's a pretty bold statement. It really shows how much tension he sees around gender dynamics in these online discussions.
Yes, and it kind of leads him to his next point, which is about how social media fuels these, unrealistic expectations in dating, especially when it comes to those traditional gender roles,
Yeah, so he's saying social media is basically making those differences in expectations even worse.
That's exactly what he's arguing. He points to what he sees as hypocrisy, like how some women demand men follow those traditional roles like paying for dates or, being the main breadwinner, but then they don't want those same expectations for themselves.
And he uses this pretty funny example. He talks about women wanting equality in those high-paying corporate jobs, but then, not in blue-collar jobs that have traditionally been mostly men. It made me laugh.
Yeah, it's funny, but it makes a good point. It makes you ask, are we really striving for true equality, or do we just want equality in the areas that benefit us?
That's a great question. So, okay, we've got therapists talking about manipulation, commentators criticizing these social movements and all this tension around gender roles. There's a lot to unpack here.
It is a lot.
So how does all of this connect back to like the overall impact social media is having on personal connections?
Well, that's the heart of the issue, isn't it? Think about how curated all those online profiles are. It's like this constant pressure to show the perfect image of yourself, and that can easily lead to all these unrealistic expectations. And then, comes the disappointment when those online personas don't actually match up with the real life interactions.
Right. So it's like everybody's trying to sell their best self online. But when you actually meet in person, there's this gap between the fantasy and reality. I can see how that would make it hard to build a genuine connection.
For sure. And then you add in the fact that dating apps give you access to this huge pool of potential partners. It seems endless, right? And it's really easy to fall into that grass is always greener trap.
Yeah, I get it. So instead of focusing on building a connection with one person, you're constantly swiping and comparing and, wondering if there's someone better out there.
Exactly. And the commentator gives these interesting examples like women boasting about their, how did he put it, spicy content online, while men are struggling to find partners who are, nice, sweet, and supportive.
So there's this disconnect between what people are projecting online and what they're actually looking for in a real relationship. It sounds like social media is actually making it harder to figure out what people truly want and how to build those genuine connections.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the big questions this deep dive raises. It's not just about the superficial stuff, it's about how these online interactions are shaping our expectations and actually influencing how we behave in real life relationships.
Wow, this is getting pretty deep. I'm definitely starting to see how all these different pieces connect together. Maybe we should pause here and pick up the rest of this conversation in part 2.
Sounds good to me. I think our listeners will have a lot to think about after this first part of our deep dive. Welcome back. I'm sure your brains are like buzzing after that first part of our deep dive. So where should we pick up the thread?
It's crazy how this conversation touches on so many different things. Anxieties about dating, these big social movements, even legal principles. We've got this marriage therapist giving advice based on like years of experience, then a commentator of a totally different perspective, and then like snippets of social media conversations. It's a lot.
What's fascinating is that even with all these different opinions, they all kind of point back to this one main theme, the struggle to build real connections in, the digital age. Whether you agree with the therapist or the commentator, they're both saying social media can really mess with how we see ourselves and other people.
Yeah, and I think that distortion you're talking about, that's what makes it so hard to know what's real and that's just a carefully crafted online persona. It's like we're all playing these roles online, trying to be the most attractive, the most successful, the most, desirable version of ourselves.
It's exhausting, right? It's like this performance all the time. No wonder people are feeling disconnected and disillusioned. Real life rarely lives up to, the perfection you see on social media.
It also makes you wonder if social media is making us more judgmental. We're constantly seeing these images of perfect bodies and relationships and lifestyles. And I think that can create a sense of inadequacy, like you're not good enough, and then it turns into this competition.
Right. It's easy to compare yourself to others and feel like you're, falling short. And it's important to remember that what we see online is usually just a tiny, carefully chosen part of someone's life. It's not the whole picture. It's like watching the highlight reel and not the behind the scenes stuff where the real work happens.
Okay, but can we circle back to something that's been bugging me? The therapist advice to never believe a woman's story. I get that she's trying to make a point about like manipulation and stuff, but it just feels extreme,
It's definitely a strong statement, but I think we have to remember that she's talking from her experience in marriage counseling. She probably sees a lot of really intense situations, but I do think her point about how people can manipulate narratives is worth thinking about. And it's not just women who do it, right?
So it's not about saying all women are liars, but more about understanding that anyone can twist a story to fit their own needs, especially when they're feeling emotional.
Exactly. It's about, developing that healthy sense of skepticism, not just about what other people tell us, but also about our own biases, how we see things.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about being cautious about other people's stories, but also being honest with ourselves about like how we might be shaping our own stories to protect our ego or avoid responsibility.
Exactly. And this is where the connection to social media gets, well, even stronger. Think about how easy it is to present a version of reality that isn't totally accurate. We filter photos, we choose what to post, we control the information we share. We're all trying to show the best version of ourselves.
Right. It's like we're all building these like personal brands online to try to get followers and likes and all that validation. And to do that, we kind of have to ignore those less glamorous parts of our lives.
Yeah. And that's where the danger is. When we're always seeing these idealized versions of reality, it messes with our expectations. It makes it harder to form real connections that are based on trust and being vulnerable.
So what's the answer? Should we all just quit social media and go live in a cave to avoid all this?
I don't think it has to be that extreme. I mean, social media can be a really great tool for communicating and connecting with people. But like any tool, it can be used in good ways and bad ways, right? The key is to use it consciously.
Okay, so be mindful of what we're looking at, who we're interacting with, and the messages we're letting in.
Right. It's about asking yourself these critical questions. What kind of content makes me feel good? What accounts are inspiring or informative? What kinds of online interactions leave me feeling, drained or negative?
It's like taking a close look at what you're feeding your mind on social media and deciding what's healthy and what's not.
Exactly. And just like with food, it's about finding a balance that works for you. You don't have to totally cut out social media, but you can make choices that put your mental health first and support your relationship goals.
So how do we actually apply all this to dating in real life? Are there any practical tips you can give us based on everything we've talked about?
Of course, one of the biggest takeaways from all this is just how important authenticity is. Instead of trying to be this perfect version of yourself online, focus on showing your real personality, what you're actually interested in.
So be yourself, basically. Don't try to fit into some mold of what you think other people want to see.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're not trying to attract everyone, right? You're looking for those people who actually appreciate you for you.
That makes a lot of sense. And it goes back to that idea of curated profiles and those unrealistic expectations. If you're putting on a show online, you're setting yourself up for disappointment when you meet someone in person.
Exactly. And remember, authenticity should go both ways. When you're looking at potential partners online, look for those signs of genuine self-expression. Don't just focus on the, perfectly posed photos or those super witty captions.
So pay attention to what they're saying, what they're into, how they interact with other people, not just how many likes they get or how polished their profile is.
Exactly. It's about trying to see the real person, not just the surface.
I think that's really valuable advice. It's so easy to get caught up in the game of online dating. You're just swiping and judging based on those first impressions. But take it the time to actually see someone for who they really are, online and offline, is so important.
It really is. And, building genuine connections, it takes time. It's not about instant gratification or finding that perfect match. It's about being open to different people, having real conversations, and, finding those shared values and interests.
So quality over quantity, basically. That's a good reminder in a world that's so obsessed with speed and efficiency.
It is, and I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our conversation. And remember, building those healthy and fulfilling relationships takes patience, vulnerability, and a willingness to step outside that carefully curated bubble of social media.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. It's like a guidebook for, figuring out the crazy world of modern dating and how to use social media in a way that actually helps us build real connections. I hope our listeners feel the same way. So we've talked about a lot of, kind of heavy stuff like manipulation and unrealistic expectations and that pressure to have this perfect image online. It's a lot, right? It can feel pretty overwhelming.
It definitely shows how challenging, navigating relationships in this digital age can be. But I actually think there's a lot of hope and empowerment we can find in these insights.
Okay, I like that. So how do we go from feeling overwhelmed to feeling empowered?
I think the first step is, well, awareness, right? Now that you're more aware of those potential pitfalls of social media, you can start to make more conscious choices about, how you use it.
You mean how we engage with it?
Exactly. Think of it like learning a new language. Once you know the rules and the vocabulary, you can express yourself more clearly.
So instead of just passively scrolling and taking everything in, we should be more, I guess, intentional about what we're looking at, who we're interacting with, and what messages we're absorbing.
Right. Start by asking yourself some critical questions like, what kind of content makes me feel good? What accounts do I find inspiring or informative?
Or the opposite.
Yeah, what kind of online interactions leave me feeling drained or negative?
It's like taking stock of your social media diet, figuring out what's good for you and what was not so good.
Exactly. And just like with food, it's all about finding that balance that works for you. You don't have to quit social media altogether, but you can be picky. Choose the things that prioritize your mental well-being and support your relationship goals.
Okay, so how do we apply this to, actually dating in real life? Are there any practical tips you can give us based on everything we've talked about?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest takeaways is the importance of being authentic. Instead of trying to project that ideal version of yourself online, just focus on showing your real personality and interests.
So instead of trying to be what you think other people want, Just be yourself.
Exactly. Because, I mean, you're not trying to attract everyone, right? You want to find the people who actually get you, who appreciate you for who you are.
That makes sense. And it like goes back to what we were saying about those curated profiles, creating all these unrealistic expectations. If you're always putting on a show online, it's just going to lead to disappointment when you finally meet someone face to face.
Totally. And, authenticity has to go both ways when you're checking out potential partners online. Don't just look at the surface stuff. Try to see those signs of genuine self-expression, not just those, perfectly posed photos and clever captions.
You mean like pay attention to what they're saying, what they're interested in, how they treat other people, not just how many likes they have or how, perfect their profile looks.
Right. It's about looking beyond the superficial stuff, trying to figure out who they really are.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. It's so easy to get caught up in the whole game of online dating, swiping left and right, judging people based on first impressions, but actually taking the time to get to know someone for who they are, both online and offline. That's important.
It really is. And remember, building those genuine connections, it takes time and effort. It's not about instant gratification. You're not going to find that perfect match overnight. It's about being open to meeting different people, having, good conversations and finding those shared values and interests.
So focus on the quality of the connections, not the number of matches. That's a really good point.
It is, and I think it's a great place to wrap up this part of our conversation. Building healthy relationships takes patience and vulnerability, and a willingness to step outside of that carefully curated bubble of social media.
This whole deep dive has really given me a lot to think about. It's like you said, a guidebook for navigating the crazy world of dating and figuring out how to use social media in a way that helps us build real connections. I hope our listeners are feeling the same.
I'm sure they are. And if you're looking for more conversations like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're always exploring new topics and diving deep into issues that matter to you.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those deep dive requests coming.